7:22. It was a really big day at the COVID-19 inquiry yesterday as two of the most powerful men in the Prime Minister's inner circle at the time, Dominic Cummings and Director of Communications Lee Kane, gave their testimonies. Here's how Dominic Cummings reacted when confronted with WhatsApp messages he sent describing colleagues in a disparaging way. Hugo Keith Casey is asking the question.
Due in large part to your own WhatsApps, Mr. Cummings, we're going to have to coarsen our language somewhat. I apologise. You called ministers useless fuckpigs, morons, cunts, in emails and WhatsApps to your professional colleagues. Do you think you contributed to a lack of effectiveness on the part of ministers and of the Cabinet?
No, I think I was reflecting a widespread view amongst competent people at the centre of power at the time about the calibre of a lot of senior people who are dealing with this crisis extremely badly.
And this is Keith reading out one of Boris Johnson's messages from October 2020.
He says, I must say I've been slightly rocked by some of the data on COVID fatalities. The median age is 82 to 81 for men, 85 for women. That's above life expectancy. So get COVID and live longer. Hardly anyone under 60 goes into hospital. I no longer buy all this NHS overwhelmed stuff. Folks, I think we may need to recalibrate.
And that one message really encapsulates what we learnt yesterday in terms of that changing of direction of policy and also this repeated idea that older people were expected to catch the virus and maybe that wasn't a bad thing. One person who talked to us during the pandemic was Ruthie Henshall. She's a well-known actress who campaigned for care home visits to be allowed to prevent residents from dying from loneliness during lockdown after her own mother's health rapidly declined. And she joins us now. Ruthie, good morning.
Morning.
I think that last message that we just heard there, that was, of course, Boris Johnson's message read out during that inquiry, is one of the most telling. What was your reaction to hearing that?
I was pretty devastated and really angry because, I watched my mother, dying from a care home window while they were kissing in corridors and cheersing each other for the marvellous job that they've been doing. And they had no idea what they were doing. No idea. And the fact that that old people were expendable. We're going back to the time of AIDS, when people said, oh, great, we'll just get rid of all the gay people. It was just shocking. It was shocking then and it's shocking now that that they had no respect whatsoever for the thousands of people who were watching their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, all dying of loneliness and giving up the will to live, giving up the will to even survive. My mother was 24/7 on her own for almost a year in her room. That's where is the, that's a basic human right to have family and a right to a family life. And we opened up and the care homes stayed battened down because they're a business. And at the end of the day, it's the money that matters to them. So what we had was, a postcode lottery, basically. And, as to whether you could, I was able to speak to my mother once every 3 weeks on an iPad that was being passed around the whole home, one iPad. And it was devastating because everybody wanted to speak to their loved ones. But when you have somebody with dementia, they don't know what they're looking at. That iPad, that wasn't invented when they were little, and that's all they can remember by that point.
Yeah. There will be some people, it's listening back and looking at some of those messages that were shared at the time, it is in some ways hard to remember quite what it felt like for all of us to be approaching a second lockdown and for the mental health questions, not just of older people, but of younger people too. What seems to have been driving Boris Johnson's thinking in that moment when that message was read out in October 2020 was the economy and fears that there would be a huge impact on the British economy that would be hard to recover from. And later a suggestion that locking down again would have a huge impact on children, on education and on young people. And it looked like at the time they were trying to balance all of those things out. And that's where this conversation about, well, older people are older people already, and maybe that's okay. I mean, how does that conversation, should that conversation ever have happened? Can you understand it to any extent? I mean, how do you feel about that in that context?
Well, look, we all know that it was new ground, but nobody was listening. It was utter chaos. Utter chaos. Nobody knew what they were doing. And to make a comment like that, a blanket comment like that, these, as I said, these are people, these are, mothers and fathers and people who've laid the way for us and they'd fought for us, some of them. This is unacceptable. And Boris cares about Boris. And at that point, for me, what he was doing was just wanting to be liked. He wasn't wanting to do the right thing. And as you can tell, it's very difficult for me to have to see the picture that he could see, because I am devastated and angry by the things that have come out. I was devastated and angry at the time. As I said, people kissing in corridors and cheersing each other was, to see that coming out when I couldn't even get to see my mother, and watching her, dying of loneliness, really. There is no excuse for saying it's nature's way when, the reason that that a lot of this happened in the care homes was people were sent home without testing. Yeah. They were sent back to the homes.
You're now campaigning for Gloria's Law in your mother's memory. What are you hoping to achieve through that?
What it would mean is that enshrined in law would be that no matter what happens, another pandemic, that every person in care, including children, would be entitled to one essential caregiver, and they would have the same rights as a carer in the home. So that a person in care could have somebody and a right to not be lonely again. And this is not asking for much, but it is absolutely vital. It's a basic human right.
Ruthie Henshall, thank you for joining us this morning to talk about the personal impact, really, of the COVID inquiry and what we're starting to hear coming out of that.
And there's a criticism of the phrasing there, which Ruthie's very articulated really well. But there is this sense that maybe Boris Johnson was right to say, to test the boundaries of whether lockdown is acceptable or not acceptable, and the consequences of that, some of which were the ones that Ruthie is concerned about, that her mum couldn't see people.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult now. It's kind of what I was trying to get at in that question about, looking at it now in the context. Trying to look back in that context is very difficult at a time when there were other concerns about young people, and the conversation was around, can you lock down older people and protect them, but still allow other people to carry on?